Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are listening from today, and welcome to the first ever live production of 50 Shades of Green here at the Hub Live at Climate Week NYC. 50 Shades of Green is a podcast we've been doing for nearly 2 years now, and one thing that we discovered running Climate Week NYC is we meet so many amazing, interesting people, and we use the podcast as a way of allowing them to share their stories with us and with you. And we were having discussions a few months ago, and we were thinking we'd really love to do an episode about innovation, but we couldn't decide if we wanted to do it as a Climate Week NYC event or a podcast. So we decided to mash the two together, and that's what we've got right now. So I'm not going to do names and biogs. I'm going to let the panel talk about the work that they do. So we're just going to kick straight into a discussion about what these four amazing people are up to in the space of innovation. Shannon, I'm going to go to you first. Who are you, and what do you do?
Great. Thank you, Adam. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm Shannon Yee. I'm a professor of mechanical engineering at the Georgia Institute of Technology. For the last 5 years, I've been leading an effort sponsored by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation on reinventing the toilet.
Right? And that's why you were asking me earlier if you're allowed to say shit on this podcast.
That's exactly right.
Okay. And we've got a little bit of a video to show, so let's find out a little bit more about what you've been working on.
Great. And as that video gears up,
half the world needs a toilet. The other half needs a better one. And this includes the United States, where many households lack safe and affordable sanitation. Soon we'll wonder why we flush precious drinking water down the toilet.
Conventional sewage systems have left billions in need of sanitation. Our foundation challenged the world to reinvent the toilet, and Georgia Tech led a global collaboration to meet the challenge.
Our reinvented toilet safely processes urine into clean water for flushing and feces into ash. Because it is compact and self-contained, it requires no connection to traditional infrastructure, meaning it can be deployed broadly and alleviate pressure on existing systems.
However, technology alone is not enough. To create an impactful and just outcome, we must scale production and streamline supply chains, develop skilled labor within local communities, evolve building codes without compromising existing protections, and implement business models that enable adoption for all, not just for a privileged few.
With MacArthur's support, Georgia Tech can be anchored at the center of this effort to leverage our expertise to ensure that the reinvented toilet gives the world just sanitation.
Excellent. Thank you. That was really interesting. Please explain why you decided to make this your focus. What was it that motivated you there?
Great question. The short answer is about 3.6 billion people around the world lack access to improved sanitation, and the other half of the world needs a better toilet. Right? In the context of climate change, we often don't think about some of the adaptation technologies that we're going to need, specifically for New York, with our combined sewer and stormwater systems. There's going to be raw sewage in the streets of New York like there was last summer in 2023. Right? So we need to really look at this overall infrastructure and system and start turning it into an appliance to be able to be prepared to adapt for the changing climate.
And I guess sometimes when we talk about innovation, we sort of think about the latest iPhone, the latest electric vehicle, but you're talking about things that are desperately needed around the world and especially in the global south. Do you think that makes it easier or harder to get attention and funding and all the things that you need?
In the context of the toilet, it actually makes it a lot easier because everybody poops, right? Everyone is familiar with that technology. So it's just something we often don't discuss. And so bringing and elevating that dialogue, I think really is important. When it comes to the toilet, it's been around a long time, 150 years without real innovation.
I've got one.
You got one?
Yep.
Exactly. They're everywhere, right? But the challenge is we have to change, right? Because the current practices are not just. And so the theme for Climate Week is it's time, right? It's time for just sanitation. These practices have existed for millennia, where we have affluent individuals living where water enters a city, and less affluent individuals live where water exits a city. Right? It is a huge source for injustice around the world, and honestly, lack of access to sanitation is what keeps people in poverty. So if we want to address climate adaptation in a just manner, we're going to have to look at everything we're doing, including sanitation.
So a toilet is something that everybody can understand. Maybe let's talk about an area that not everyone can relate to, which is going to Mars. Vlada, tell us your story.
Maybe we stop first on the moon, but gladly. My name is Vlada Stamenkovic, and I work for Blue Origin. Blue Origin is, you may know, is an aerospace company. But when I left 4 years ago, NASA, I joined Blue Origin because it's an aerospace company that is focused to bring benefits back to the Earth. And not in the far future, but today. And so I'm fortunate at Blue Origin to lead the whole program related to space resources, which ultimately, if you want to imagine that, is developing the technologies that allow us to live anywhere in space. Live on the moon, live on Mars, live in anywhere we go. And when you address these questions in space, you have to rely to work there, utilize feedstocks like impure rocks and dirt, more or less, with not much value per se. You can't use water, you can't use chemicals, you can't use any carbon. So you have to learn how to extract valuables from these materials like iron, aluminum, silicon, nickel, copper, and then make useful things. And so what we're doing at Blue Origin is we're developing technologies right now that take any dirt on the moon, but also on the Earth, soil, sands, rocks, and in a complete green way. So without any carbon emissions, because there's no carbon involved in it, without using water or any chemicals, using just solar power, we are extracting valuable metals, which we all need for anything we do, valuable critical minerals. And we're using these to make them the most basic thing to drive things, which is power. We're making solar panels with that. And so we're trying to stir up the technologies that allow humanity, no matter where, to actually generate whatever they need locally without the need of transportation and make that in a complete green way.
So you're working on something quite literally out of this world. Tell us, as a human being, what made you want to do this? What sort of gets you up in the morning?
Well, that's a good point. A good cup of coffee helps, or two. But generally, when I was a kid, we just spoke about Star Trek, and I always loved Star Trek for one specific reason, not because of the action or adventure. It's because it's a society where humans have managed to get there, I'm not going to use the word now yet, exactly, together, and actually work together globally, bring fairness and justice, appreciate each other, be amazed by each other, and ultimately do what humanity is destined to do, just be explorers. And so when I initially started working in space exploration, I really believed space is the next frontier that connects this. For me, let's connect is the important part. Connecting space to the Earth, learning about the Earth from space. Look at just, for example, how monitoring the Earth from space has taught us a process about connections, about injustices as well. And so the next step is to really learn how we can live in space and how that new approach of thinking that is completely disconnected from our technologies that we maybe used for 2,000 years. A lot of the actually smelting and processing that we do in metal industry is from the Roman Empire still. So thinking out of the box, literally, thinking away from the planet allows us to completely connect space and the Earth and help also heal the Earth and our society.
I guess between space and the Earth, we've got lots of sea and land, and US naval research. You kind of work there, huh?
No, we do. My name's Heather Willauer, and I work for the U.S. Naval Research Laboratory. I've been there for about 20 years. And we're specializing, the technology we're developing is removing carbon dioxide from seawater, and then the utilization of that CO2 to make fuel and materials for the Navy. So our job, it's fitting in with the climate goals, which is fantastic, but it is to how do I make fuel when and where I need it.
Is it like jet fuel?
Yes,
jet fuel from seawater.
Yep.
That sounds like something from Star Trek.
Hopefully we're making it less and less like Star Trek and more like a reality with the electrochemical technology that we have that removes the CO2 and enables hopefully the ocean to recover even more CO2 from the atmosphere and re-equilibrate it. So it's a great sink for CO2 and for our climate initiatives, and working in that area to do that.
So obviously we're talking to different people, innovators, not just on this stage, but in the audience as well. some people work for small organizations that can move fast, and some people work for very large organizations. The US Navy is definitely a large organization. How does that change the way that you approach innovation as a researcher, as a scientist, as an individual trying to make a difference?
Well, as an individual trying to make a difference, we want to put our technologies and develop technologies to put it in the hands of the warfighter. We want to transition the things that we develop in the laboratory and put it in their hands to make a difference so that they can protect our country and the things that we do here. And so that's my objective as a scientist. How do I do that? What technologies do we develop that we can put out there in the fleet and help them?
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because when you think of sort of military, effectiveness is the number one rule. And we did a panel at the US Climate Action Summit early in the year with Meredith Berger, the Assistant Secretary to the Navy, and she was commenting on how actually sustainability is logistically much better. Is that your experience as well?
Absolutely, right? We're surrounded by the ocean. That's where we work, and it's a supply chain, right? You're only as good as your supply chain, is the fuel that you get, the food that you get, and anything you can make when and where you need it, you're going to be focused on your mission at hand. So absolutely, and the great thing too for where we work too is we do want to get our technology in the hands of the warfighter, but we also want to put it out there for civilians to use too. That is our objective and goal.
And that is a huge part of the conversation today as well, is that innovation means nothing if it's not being used by real people.
Right.
David, tell us about your experience and the people that you're working with and the innovations that are impacting their lives.
Sure, and very impressive segues, Adam. My name's David Nicholson. I'm the Chief Climate Officer for Mercy Corps. Mercy Corps is a global humanitarian organization. We're here at Climate Week because in the places that we work, the climate crisis is a humanitarian crisis, and that's today. So there's a ton of urgency for us to engage. When we think about our work we work in 42 countries around the world, all experiencing extreme climate risks. Adaptation and resilience is the watchword, right? These are communities that are least responsible for climate change and suffering the worst impacts today. So this is our motivating force. And adaptation means doing something different, right? It means that whatever the systems of livelihoods that may or may not have been working to whatever degree beforehand probably no longer work. So it's an opportunity for change. That creates an opportunity for innovation and to bring in new ideas, to develop locally new ideas, new technologies, new approaches that can be appropriate to that context, that challenge in this changing environment we're in. So the opportunity for innovation is vast. Putting aside how ridiculously intimidating it is to be on stage with these three rocket scientists.
They look so scary, don't they?
Yeah. But I'm really grateful that we're part of this conversation because we're thinking about it from all the way downstream, the user end. What is needed for communities, individuals that are in greatest need, and how do we target innovation to meet that purpose? How do we design with a core purpose in mind? And that's something that at Mercy Corps we think a lot about. What are the challenges that are being faced locally, and how can we work with the innovators around the world, whether they're locally, whether they're somewhere else across the world, to develop products, approaches, services that can impact them. We have learned that proximity really matters, right? Like R&D can happen anywhere in the world, but when it comes to the application and the design of solutions and technologies that can solve a problem in a place, being embedded in that location really matters. And we have 6,000 team members around the world who are working with local research institutions, local businesses, all sorts to try and connect the innovation that might be happening globally to innovation locally to solutions that can roll out and scale. We don't have time for solutions that aren't going to scale. So the innovation has to be driven on what can reach as many people as possible. So that's how we think about it.
One of the things that I learned when I worked in the humanitarian aid space before jumping into climate is when you're in the field, if you're in a refugee camp somewhere, it's a completely different experience, understanding what people need. I've certainly been guilty of sitting in an office in London or New York and thinking what people need. But when you're on the ground, When it comes to innovation, coming up with ideas and technologies that are going to make an impact, how do you bridge that gap between the people on the ground and the people who can actually invest in these different technologies?
Yeah, it's a good question, and there's no magic formula for it, right? But it is, and we try and play a bridge role between what's out there in the world is happening, but then really listening to users. I mean, it sounds trite, right? But actually listening to users is really important. Let me give you a couple of examples. We've been doing adaptation resilience building work in Kenya, and particularly northern Kenya, for a long time. And we came in with a bunch of ideas of the sorts of innovations that would be necessary: early warning systems, remote sensing, ability to track soil moisture for rangeland, and all this stuff's really important. But something that we learned by listening to communities there was one of the biggest things they needed help with was cold storage because of the camel milk. Camel milk for the Somali
I've heard camel milk is delicious.
in the north. It's an acquired
Seriously?
taste.
My husband lied to me then.
It's a little sour for me, but it is very popular. But, you know, they lose, the latest figures we saw, 1.3 billion Kenyan shillings a year in value of camel milk is lost to a part of the country that, you know, can't afford to lose that amount of money. So this is a real challenge, and we've been working for many, many years to figure out, okay, what are the emerging technologies and solutions that might be coming out of research institutions around the world? Who are the dynamic social enterprises companies locally in Kenya? I don't know if anyone spends much time in Nairobi. It is an innovation hub to an incredible degree, and there's such a lot of creativity there. Tons of startup businesses trying to solve these problems. So if we can identify those entrepreneurs who see this challenge, we're able to use some of our philanthropic money, our public money, to support partnerships, support interaction with global research institutions, and then help them innovate, develop. And there's a company now in Kenya called Savannah Circuit that has developed a mobile cool box system that can go on the back of a little motorcycle, electric motorcycles,
of course,
the back of little trucks, and electric powered. It's been optimized so that it works in low light because they tend to transport in dawn and dusk to maintain a sufficient temperature so that camel milk doesn't spoil between coming from the northern towns and counties into the sort of sub-regional and then ultimately down to Nairobi. Another quick example, we've been working in Nairobi, a similar challenge, cold storage. Everywhere cold storage is fishing communities in Lagos, spoiling fish constantly. There was a great product on the market, a company called Coolbox, but they were struggling because their business model was trying to sell to other businesses and it just wasn't working. So the innovation there wasn't the technology, they had the technology, it was the business model. And we helped them experiment with different business models and realize that actually with the right financing, you could sell direct to customers. You could actually sell direct to largely women fisher people who were making enough excess money to pay back the loan on a product like that in surprising speed. So there's different sorts of innovation comes in at different points of the value chain.
Shannon, I see you nodding furiously along with that. What's your take?
Yes, so as a professor, you have to get out of the lab. You have to go and engage the world. We have to take our students with us. So when we were reinventing the toilet, we set up operations in South Africa and India. During the pandemic, we actually were field testing in people's homes, right? All the different innovations.
How intense is the field testing in people's homes? That sounds slightly uncomfortable.
It is slightly uncomfortable, right? You have to engage people where they are. You have to take the feedback. You have to figure out how you're going to actually make this technology work. So I think so much of this is we have to get out of our research labs, out of our comfortable spaces, and go and engage the world where it is, right? In the case for New York City, I've been amazed at just trying to understand some of the sanitation challenges for the city. Did you know that there are 7,400 miles of sewer lines underneath the city?
I didn't know that, but I can believe it.
Yeah. Now,
that's insane.
With 5,280 feet in a mile and a cost of $250 per linear foot, that comes to a price tag of about $10 billion of embedded infrastructure. And the price to fix the sanitation problem in New York is a little over $100 billion.
Wow.
Right? To put that in perspective, just for New York City, with the 10 million toilets that are here, that's about $10,000 per toilet. Are you willing to pay $10,000 for your toilet?
I'll just hold it.
Yeah, you'll hold it. Exactly. Right? So when you start engaging in a regional challenge, right, it becomes, everything else is different. So you have to get out of the lab. You have to go and engage people where they are. You have to listen to what the actual challenges are, or you won't be able to invent a solution.
So pulling back the Climate Week NYC curtain a bit on this. And this is a conversation I joined as the head of Climate Week in 2018. I've had this conversation a lot about how do you make climate summits effective? We can't just talk about innovation and not try to innovate ourselves about what we get out of these meetings. So I'm going to ask a challenging question. Please answer it as you will. But Vlada, this is your first Climate Week NYC. How can we make summits like this more useful for someone like you who is an innovator? What are the things that you need to take away from a week like this to do your job more effectively?
I think this is happening right now. I mean, you said you're impressed by the technology side. I'm impressed by you. I mean, ultimately, it's finding that bridge between urgent need right now, and that's something that you're tackling, like needs that need to be fixed yesterday. Like people need this, and so that's the part that I want to learn about, because what we're developing is not right now, but not too far in the future. So we're trying to ultimately, you work with technologies right now that will make people's lives better, but we're thinking about technologies that will ultimately have to evolve into, if we really want to have a green planet, a green future, carbon neutrality, and beyond that as well, real environmental friendliness. And so I think finding that intersection as time evolves, it's really the critical part. So for me, it's really learning about the present, and I'd like to be able to discuss with you and show you what the future, near-term future, has to look like in technological parameter space, so that we can have the full transition and make sure people are happy now, and people are going to be happy in 20, 30, 40 years.
Brilliant. Heather, do you have a take
No,
on that?
absolutely. It's connecting people and connecting people in the laboratory with what the problems are. And then how can we adapt our technology to what people need and in the future. The things that we're making for the Navy with our electrochemical technology for recovering the CO2, we can potentially utilize that controlling acidification and things like that. So how do you meet those people, and how do you develop those opportunities to try your technologies in different scenarios as well?
What advice would you give to, none of this works if there's not new, fresh, young talent coming into this space. Do you think there's a short supply of new talent, or what's your take?
Oh, I do. I think with particularly with COVID, just on the side that we come from at the laboratory and recruiting and seeing who's going to graduate school, there is some difficulty there in terms of potentially from the research side. I certainly feel like different folks here maybe on the industry side. That there's no shortage in that per se that I know about, but I do know on the research side we are seeing some shortages in folks.
You raised your microphone first.
Next to just more like research talent, it's about talent that's crossing boundaries. I mean, I was impressed by Shannon telling me how he was actually doing before the nuclear reactors, and now doing poop science and technology, which is, I think that's the part. It's about the questions. If I look at my career, like I started as a physicist, going into now technologies which are completely unrelated to each other, but being driven by a question. And the question is to make the world better, and just doing whatever it takes. And I see it in my team, we've got people that are bridging rock science with semiconductor technologies, and those things don't exist. There is no models that take the full value chain from A to Z. And so it's really about getting the talent that's curious enough to say, like, heck, I want to solve this problem, and I'll do whatever it takes, whichever language, whichever science, I'm going to solve it. And
trying to motivate people to do that, right? The young folks to get into science, to want to solve these problems.
We've woken up a live subject. Everyone's got the mic up. So let's go to Shannon, then David.
So, as a professor, I have the joy of being able to work with a lot of students and seeing them actually go through this research experience. And, at Georgia Tech, our mission is to develop leaders who advance technology and improve the human condition. And we really live that. Right? It's largely an engineering school, and the demand is off the charts, right? One thing we're not terribly proud of is we've ended up becoming one of the most selective universities in the nation just due to the number of students that are applying, and we can only accept so many given the scale that we have. But one thing I'm incredibly proud of Georgia Tech for is increasing enrollment and making it lower cost. So it's the cost of tuition now, when you correct for inflation, is cheaper now than it was previously.
Wow.
We're keeping it accessible.
Is that unique?
I think it is. I don't know exactly the statistics, but I think it's very unique. And for the last 20 years, Georgia Tech has been rated as one of the best valued educations in the US, right? So I think it's something that in our culture, in our DNA, we are trying to produce as many graduates as we can to fill these needs, and they are going on to amazing careers, amazing opportunities, amazing jobs. And it's a very exciting place. So, I love my job. I love being able to interact with students. I love seeing all the innovation, right? Tomorrow we have 10 student startup companies that will be here specifically focused on climate, and they'll be showing off some of the technologies they're developing. We have one of the largest startup incubators in the nation that I know kind of goes underappreciated, but we are producing a large number of trained technologists, and they're hungry.
That's great. That's definitely what we like to hear. David, you wanted to come in on that.
Yeah, to your original question about how do we make a success of these events, there's no doubt that the connecting with people in person and inspiring the next generation is so fundamental. And, there's often cynical eyes rolled when I tell friends and family that I'm flying off somewhere to go to a big meeting to talk about climate change, because for the obvious, but we haven't succeeded in finding, we're human beings, this is how we interact, right? And this is just incredibly powerful. But it would be remiss to not mention the fact that, connecting, aligning ideas, all these things is vital, but we are in a massive financing gap. And these things can only be successful if we are successful in channeling more money to where it's needed. Presumably lots of people would have seen the adaptation financing gap reports last year. We're billions of dollars short. We need to stimulate that money from the private sector, which means we have to use philanthropic money really smartly to test ideas and prove them and sort of provide a pathway for that. So these sorts of events have to, and it's incumbent on some people like me to speak to people who do hold the purse strings to say, we do know what works for adaptation. We do have innovations that are showing promise. And we've got evidence to bear that's sufficient to enable more money to flow. And that is, a vital part of these kinds of gatherings, that if we don't come out the other end with greater investment, then we're failing.
Money's an interesting one because it is terribly, terribly important. I mean, kicking off with you, Heather, I imagine, tell me if I'm wrong, but are there lots of resources? You're a large organization. Is it difficult to get funding for the thing you're working on?
Well, we're lucky and we're unlucky in that regard. We, the Naval Research Laboratory is a working capital, so we're not a line item in the budget, and we have to find the funding for the projects that we want to work on, which is great because you get to work on the things you want to work on, but you have to have an interested party and a sponsor for that. So it can be very difficult. And so when you look at that 20-year lifespan, 30-year lifespan to get a technology somewhere, if your funding is just cyclical and some days you have it, some days it's less, how do you plan for graduate students? How do you plan for postdocs? That money is very critical.
I would say we were very fortunate with reinventing the toilet that we had such a great champion like Bill Gates. He's been supporting this for over a decade, and in this specific phase of the work, right, it was about a $30 million grant to be able to take this technology and really catalyze it. Right? So, philanthropic dollars, as David mentioned, applied appropriately. We've been able to license the technology to 3 large global manufacturers, one based in Europe, one based in Asia, and one with their manufacturing here in the US. Our partner, Lixil, which owns brands like American Standard, which is the #1 toilet brand in the US, and DVX, which is actually the toilets here in the glass house, which I noticed when
No way!
I was like, hey, there we go. So, it's how do you take that philanthropic capital, use it to catalyze an innovation, and then how do you translate that to industry where they want to go after scaling commercially, right? That's the benefit that you have. And so when we have this type of commercial demand globally, right, where they're like, okay, we're now ready to take this forward, I don't have to spin out a startup company. I can hand it off directly to large global manufacturers. They can walk down the path of making it lower cost and then distributing. So these global partnerships, and I think Climate Week is great because this is where some of the connections happen.
Vlada, the first time I spoke with you, just over a year ago, I remember thinking, I have no idea what this call is about.
Same here.
I don't know how it relates to climate change. I don't know. And then I sort of came off the call thinking, we're talking about going to the moon. My mind was blown. But the reason why I say that is, for a lot of people, they don't realize this is a problem. They don't even realize this is a thing. So whether it's funding or other support, how do you find that journey of making people understand that what you're working on is a thing?
Is a thing in general? Is a thing that
is a thing that we should prioritize? Is a thing that it can be a solution to climate change?
That's a good question. Well, I'll start first with one thing. If I look at my team, and a shout out to Team Blue, but also to the Space Resources Center folks in Los Angeles. These are multiple tens of people who come initially from all kinds of sciences, engineering, and they've chosen this path because they believe that hard work is required between space and the Earth to not just open up the future, but really solve the problems of the present. Yeah. And those people are really, I admire and I'm proud to be working with. And so why does it matter? I mean, first, inevitably, right? We know we've learned about climate change. We learned about a lot of things on the planet just by actually being in space, right? Seeing the Earth as one thing, understanding how processes operate on a global scale. That's been the key to actually understand what's going on the planet. But ultimately as well, just very practically, so, away from going to the moon and going beyond there where we go, the current technologies we develop right now, right, are going to be applicable to help, get to green steel, get to more green mining. And ultimately, that's why I'm excited about you two guys here very much. You two, of course, but starting here on the...
Come on.
They got me really on the, direct people needs. We're developing, a system in partnership with NASA called Blue Alchemist that down the line will be capable of being, deployed anywhere on the planet, in Africa, in Southeast Asia, in South America, here in the US, where we also need it, and just take in dirty rocks and sand and soil, put it in the reactor it's a small system that is ultimately driven by solar power, and you can generate ultimately solar panels. So think about that. Anything we do, right, requires power. Everything. And so if you can do this anywhere on the planet, give it to communities, and that's what my wish is, that we can give it back to communities that are in need, that they can suddenly generate power in a green way with no toxins, just with the dirt they have in their garden, and then use that power systems to connect to actually flushing toilets, to getting groundwater, to growing food, and connect to knowledge. Ultimately, we're going to be, by exploring space, right, giving space to so many brilliant minds living in the universe. But with this technology in the next few years, we'll be able to activate those brilliant minds all over the world that don't have a chance to actually speak and to be creative because they have to survive. And so, if you ask me why this matters, why space matters right now for the Earth, something that started by thinking how we survive in space is leading to technologies nowadays that we're working with NASA and the Department of Energy, hopefully, to really drive actually change in the next 5 years in communities in the US and globally to make their lives better. And the way why this works so well is because when we're thinking about technologies in space, we have to think differently. And we have to think without carbon. I always joke and say, when you go to the moon, the only carbon we really leave is what we leave behind. There we go. Connection right there back to Shen. It's not much carbon, So we have to, per se, develop new technologies that do not rely on carbon. And in our society, we've relied on carbon forever in different forms. And so that space is teaching us to really expand our horizons to not be a carbon-dependent society.
David, your response to that?
Yeah, I really want to pick up on something Vlada said around the ability to see the world as a whole and sort of connecting that all the way down. It's become so fundamental to the work that we see on the ground. So, the ability to start to, from the earlier basic satellites to now all of the predictive modeling and the incredible amount of climate data we have out there. There's now this incredible rich ecosystem of organizations that are taking that data, developing predictive models, developing early warning systems, and this stuff comes all the way down to very specific on-the-ground benefits. So one example, we have a program in Guatemala that's looking at early warning systems for hurricanes that are very specifically targeted. The reason we want them to be specifically targeted is that we have a system in partnership with some digital financial services companies to catalyze remittances to be sent 3 days before the arrival of a hurricane. We know that this is called anticipatory action in climate speak. We know that dollars arriving a few days before are so much more valuable than dollars arriving a few days afterwards. The system only works if the information is accurate. People trust it. So the fact that we now have gone from this ability to see the Earth as a whole, different layers of analysis now gets to incredibly accurate predictions so that we can, on the ground, catalyze money to flow from often around the US in remittance form two households in Guatemala that are then are able to invest money in their preparedness and response is incredible on the ground.
That's a great example of how technology is really making an impact. Heather, I see you agreeing with that.
No, it's just fantastic to hear that's happening, right? And the things that people are working on are making a difference. And also, you know, in those areas that definitely need them, in the impoverished areas.
I'm going to, Shannon, please. I want to wrap up this piece and go to some questions from the audience, but I'd love to ask you a quick fire question, which is, what you've been discussing all in different ways, it describes a completely different world. I'm quite melodramatic, but I think, you know, I'm not being melodramatic there. So in your mind, how different do you think this world is going to be in 50 years' time? And we hear a lot, there's 900 events going on. We're all saying we don't want the planet to end. You know, global warming is going to do all these terrible things. But you're talking about positive changes to the world. So a very brief answer, what do you think the world will look like in 50 years' time? Shannon?
I'm very optimistic. I think the world is going to be great in 50 years' time. You've given me a lot of time there to be able to invent new technologies and deploy them. So I'm very optimistic for the future. You know, I don't think people will change all that much. I think we will invent the technologies that will save us like we have in the past, and we'll be able to continue to have a very prosperous life.
Thank you. Heather?
No, I agree. I agree that those situations that we get into as human beings that crunch us in and make us have to innovate, that we're going to innovate. And we've got a lot of smart people, and I think we'll be fine.
Great.
It's always amazing. Yeah.
That is a great quote line.
I do. It's amazing looking back, you know, just as we age, just to see how people haven't changed. But innovation is there. I'm always working with postdocs and new people at the laboratory. Always excited to see how their mentality and how they've come and changed, and forward thinking and wanting to help the planet and wanting to help humanity, you know.
Brilliant. Thank you. David?
I had the privilege of hearing Dr. Jane Goodall speak last night, and she described optimism as moral courage. She was quoting somebody else, and I forget who it was, but anyway, I'm quoting her. And I like that because, you know, we have to be optimistic in this sphere, but we have to be optimistic while embracing justice. Human beings have the capacity to embrace justice and to not embrace justice.
Yes.
So I think there is an optimistic path here, but we have to keep that central to everything we do.
We really connect really well right now because Shackleton said that.
Shackleton,
and the reason why I was actually preparing to say that is I was really inspired on Sunday by the closing speech by the previous Prime Minister of New Zealand. She just kicked ass. I mean, all respect. I hope you hear that. And I think one thing people forget when you're optimistic, right? It's not about naivety. It's not about not knowing. It is about understanding what needs to happen and knowing there is no other way. And so I believe very firmly that in 50 years from now, there is no other way for this planet to be better connected, better understanding each other, fairer, juster, and really accepting what we need to change to make actually climate the way it should be. And so I'm enormously optimistic because there's no. We have to do this. We have to do this together and be just determined. If we're determined, we'll get there.
Well, it's nice to have 4 people on the stage who are working on some really interesting things, all feeling optimistic. It's nice to have some optimism. Careful optimism, of course. But it's positive energy allows us to do many, many, many more things. I think I've got time for one question. Does anyone want to ask a question in the audience? Hands up who's feeling optimistic.
It's a speaker's dessert, right?
Phil in the corner.
Tee one up.
Well, I say thank you to the audience for helping us out because I was running over schedule. So no further questions. I do want to give you all the last word and say, out of big week ahead, 900 events, as I keep on mentioning, there are a lot of young people wanting to engage, and they're asking how they can be involved. And often people say that young people don't have a seat at the table, they don't have a voice, and we try our very, very best, but it's difficult sometimes to involve people without being tokenistic. You need to find a way of making sure you engage with people. I'd love to each of you, in terms of the areas that you work in, what advice would you be giving to a young person that wants to go into the area that you work in? Shannon, let's go for you first.
As a professor, I very much advocate for education, right? Go to school, learn. There's a lot more that you can do with education that makes you even more impactful, and you can really amplify that passion. So that's some of the advice I'd give.
Education.
And to top off education, I think what justice comes into to play there, because it is difficult and can be very expensive for people to get an education. But there's a lot of opportunities out there to get an education. So don't let that stop you. 100% don't let that stop you, especially in this country. College is very expensive, but don't let it stop you, because there's a lot of opportunities to learn and to get that paid for and to move forward.
That's a great point. David?
Once you're educated, I would advocate for getting your hands dirty. If there's a challenge you're particularly interested in, find an opportunity to work with, embedded with communities, or whoever is the relevant group of people. There's lots of ways to do that. In my world, that's international, but there's just as many things you can do here in the US. You can roll up your sleeves, volunteer if necessary. I started my career volunteering. Not everybody can do that, but there are ways to do that, even if you're doing it part-time. Find ways to just get that on-the-ground experience, to understand the details of a challenge. Sort of helps set your passions on their way.
Fantastic. Vlada?
We're going to end it with from passion to compassion. I think, yes, completing that, find a team that you really believe in. Find people you trust and love to work with. We can't do anything ourselves, right? We have to be force multiplier. And so once you get to the point, find the research institutions, the companies, the friends, whoever they are, unite your force, unite your passion, work together, and don't forget, it's not about a career. Life is not about a career and checking those boxes. We're always being pushed into that. It's about doing something meaningful, doing something where you're going to be at the end of your life looking back and saying, wow, that was an amazing roller coaster, and I'm leaving behind so much love and so much better things behind that when it started. That's what you want to achieve. Forget the rest.
That's a great line. It's not about a career. I think that is a really good piece of advice. And also on the education front as well, and I'm not just saying this to plug Client Week NYC, but seriously, there are 900 events going on, and most of them are open to all, and most of them are free of charge. If you pick the right events and go and speak to the right people, you can learn as much as you can in any degree, and you get the network, and it's quite fun, and sometimes there's free food. So, get involved. Look, I want to say, let's have a huge round of applause for 4 amazing people. Thank you so much. You're free to go. You're free to go as I introduce our next guest. Thank you so much, everybody. We're now going to move on to the next part of this episode of 50 Shades of Green, and I would love you to give a warm round of applause to my next guest, Suzanne DeBianca. I'm going to move in a chair so it's not like... So, thank you for joining us. This is an innovation session. That was a really, really interesting piece there. Some wonderful people. You are Executive Vice President and Chief Impact Officer of Salesforce. And actually, I interviewed you in my first ever Climate Week in 2018. So I've been following you very closely. You were there at Salesforce right at the very beginning. And it's now a humongous organization. Yeah. So first of all, can you tell us a little bit about that journey of seeing an innovation that's not known by many people grow into something that is a world-leading identity?
Sure, and thank you for having me. It's funny, I was sort of listening to the panel feeling like, God, I feel like a corporate slog. I'm not turning, poop into ash, or, rocks into solar panel, or, sucking carbon, making it into fuel, or camel's milk. It's just really interesting to learn a whole bunch of different technologies. And I'll say, if I just rewind 24 years, which is when we started Salesforce, we sort of built the model of cloud computing. And it was kind of dating myself, but in the days where you were getting CDs in the mail, and It was, millions of dollars to implement software, of which mostly sat on the shelf. And we just sort of saw a new way. And the innovation was really threefold. One was a new business model, which was, really first the new technology model, which is, software delivered over the internet. The second was a new business model, which was subscription-based, pay-as-you-go, happened, with magazines, certainly not with software. Today, it's completely ubiquitous.
Yeah.
And a new philanthropic model, which was, bring the community along with you as you build the company. Don't wait till you've reached some comfortable level of success to give back. Make it a core part of your DNA. So when we started the company, we just had this very big vision for what was possible for the future of technology, but to do it in a way that had sort of a human-centric approach.
In terms of the curve of growth, was it sort of gradual, or is there a moment when suddenly things just exploded?
I think at some level it was gradual. I mean, the company is called Salesforce.com. We do so much more than sales. We do service, we do marketing, we own Slack, we do analytics. We're all about agents and AI right now. And so I think that we've just, we've grown both organically and inorganically, but there was probably a tipping point where the on-premise software just became sort of a model that was not appropriate in business. You just didn't want to spend that kind of money to have software that was going to sit on the shelf. The subscription-based model is super cool because if you don't like it, you just turn it off.
And we actually subscribe to Salesforce as well at Climate Group.
Very
good. You don't get to come here unless someone at Climate Group has put you on the Salesforce list. Let's talk about the innovation and funding piece, because we heard there 4 very different examples of how you can fund innovation. And what we wanted to talk about today with you is Salesforce is going into that space of supporting people in the innovation area. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I think we really always have. We're only as good as the people we hire and our ecosystem and the innovation of our customers. And so, as we think about it, my remit is around impact. So I have the privilege of working in this giant company and just scanning to say, how can I take our assets and put them to positive use in the world? So we published a paper last year called the sort of full capital stack. And I'll just give you a couple examples in terms of how we're taking those resources and funding innovation. One is philanthropy. So you heard that from the panel before. It's a really good way to get R&D going, to get early ideas sort of stood up, actually also to provide equity and access to some groups that are sometimes otherwise left behind in moments of innovation, like particularly now with AI. Another is off the balance sheet. So we're the second largest corporate ventures group next to Google. And we said, our thesis was take $150 million, let's point that to for-profit entrepreneurs. And we've, blown that first $150 million out of the water and have been focused on climate tech and ed tech and really awesome entrepreneurs. So that's sort of a second way that we use our balance sheet. And maybe just another example is, we're looking at clean energy tax credits or tax equity credits. We're looking at other things that we can do from our balance sheet. So when we bought Slack, which is one of the companies we own, we did that with a green bond.
I didn't know you owned Slack.
We own Slack, yes.
Groovy.
Yeah, and we did it with a green bond, which was super cool.
As a sort of a funder, essentially, on these different projects, what experience do you have? What is the best relationship to have with someone who is innovating to allow them to fulfill their potential? Or is it different with each different person?
Yeah, I was thinking with the panel before, too. At some level, I forget who said the quote, but, necessity is the mother of invention.
Yeah.
And so when we think about innovating in our own company, whether it's around AI tools and agents, which is now what we're incredibly focused on because we're seeing all of our customers try to DIY their AI strategies, and they're spending millions of dollars and getting very little value. And we're really looking at, how can we help them from a necessity perspective move forward, whether it's in their call center, with recruiting. So we think about like the necessity of supporting our customers in that example. I think the other way is it's for us, I'll just give you another example. I built a carbon management product, and I did it out of necessity. Really good startups in this space, but they only do one thing, and I needed much more than the E. I needed the E and the S and the G and all come together, and I needed to be able to customize it. I needed to be able to connect it with my analytics. I needed to be able to visualize it. And I needed to be able to connect it to my Workday system, and we have a company called MuleSoft. So I think in both cases, we're kind of standing in the shoes of either our customers or our own operational needs and saying, how can we innovate given what we know, which is software?
I love that example of I couldn't find what I needed, so I made it. That's fantastic. I just want to ask a little bit more on the AI side, because I think there'll be people, there's lots of AI events taking place this week, and there are some people who are really into it, they understand it, it's humongously helpful, but not everyone has equal access to AI, and often it's a knowledge gap, but it can be other things. You're going into this space in a significant way. Is this something you bear in mind in terms of making sure that there's real equality of access? How can you bring more audiences in to the AI space?
Yeah, I worry about this a lot because I worry about it from an energy consumption perspective, and we're doing a lot on training our LLMs with very, sort of unique data sets to healthcare, and not, training on poetry and some of the big groups that are scraping the whole internet. So I think about all the nonprofits and the educational institutions that could potentially get left behind. What we don't want to see is another digital divide. So we've been thinking a lot about that. There's something called the Center for Civic AI, which is here in New York, which is amazing. And NVIDIA is providing some machines, and they're providing access to NGOs and to education institutions. But what we've been really doing is learning. So we ran an Education and AI Summit with the Chancellor in New York, and we're really looking at what are the tools that are important in the classroom. Like, education is super far behind. And we called the superintendents and said, what's your policy in the schools? And they basically said, we have none.
Yep.
And we did say, school starts in 2 weeks, and all the students are going to be showing up with their Snapbots and ChatGPT. And so we've just been trying to bring these really important institutions along in the learning journey. I mean, AI has been around for the last 15 years, but generative is very different in a way. And so we've been thinking at this kind of layer of agents. So what does it look like to have a teacher agent in the classroom? And we're working with Khan Academy, who's doing amazing work in that area. College Possible has built an agent layer, which is the ratio is about every student in public schools have about every college counselor has approximately 250 students that they're responsible for. And so that's like impossible to keep up with that kind of a load. So you can build a college counseling agent, which is one of the things we did with College Possible, and they're now able to give students assignments using ChatGPT. What parts of the country are you interested in? What is your GPA? What do you want to study? Are you looking for larger, small schools? Simple, AI-based questionnaire. And then that student can come in to the counselor with a really short list. And so it's accelerating.
Wow.
So we're thinking about it in the classroom. We're thinking about it in climate in a whole bunch of different ways as well.
You mentioned earlier about the days of having a CD in the post. I remember my first computer at school. It was a Sinclair ZX Spectrum Plus with a cassette. And there's one that's shared amongst like 100 people. We're at time. I do want to ask you one more question, and that's what we covered with the previous panel, which is this video of this is going out on the podcast. If there's young people watching that want to sort of emulate the road that you've taken, what would you say to them?
It's luck and timing. I think that whenever I talk to young people, which I do a lot, my main message is raise your hand. Just don't wait to be called on.
Yeah.
So if you see a hole, fill it. If you are interested in something, jump into it. So I think just getting out there, getting into the world. I have 2 college-age kids myself, and so, just continue to raise your hand. You're not going to always get it right, but if your hand's not up, you won't get the opportunity.
That's such good advice. I say, very English word. I often say, be cheeky.
Yeah, or be cheeky.
The amount of, and I think we can reflect in our own lives. There are times where we've not stood up because we felt we weren't good enough. What would be embarrassing to be seen as putting ourselves forward, and you always regret those times in life.
That's right.
And
even when you fall down.
Especially when you fall down, it's a learning experience. And Do you feel optimistic about the future? 50 years from now, like we asked the last panel, what do you think the world will be like in 50 years' time?
I actually think the world's going to be radically different. Yeah. I'm very optimistic, but I think it's going to be radically different. I think AGI is real. It's going to be here. We're going to be living alongside of computers. We're going to be just operating in a whole different way. Our life is going to be a lot easier in some ways, but jobs are going to change. And I think, like, you know, anything, the printing press and all the things that sort of scared people around losing jobs, I think it might happen a little bit in the short term, but I'm incredibly optimistic in the long term. And I think that we'll continue to innovate alongside with our machine agents about how to improve the state of the world and do it faster, more efficiently, and especially in the area of climate, you know, get it done.
Well, that's a great place to end on. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a round of applause to Suzanne DiBianca.
Thank you.
And that concludes our first episode. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope we can do this again in the future. Enjoy the rest of Climate Week NYC, everybody. Thank you very much.